Hey guys, it's Drew here, back with another video for the Dragonflight upcoming stuff. Today, I'm going to go over some Holy Paladin talents. I've got quite a few videos coming up pretty soon that will feature Holy Paladin in Dragonflight, mostly some new Mythic Plus dungeons, so I figured I would share some talents today and just kind of show what I've been running and what some folks have been running in Raid and stuff, as well as show the new, old, updated, whatever you want to call it, caster paladin build. So with that said, let's get into it. First off, go over what some folks have been running in Raid. Most people have been running the Glimmer build, which is to say Glimmer of Light. If you're not familiar with it, this was introduced in, I think BFA as an Azerite power. And it stuck with us in Shadowlands as a talent, and it's back in Dragonflight as a capstone talent. And essentially, it just leaves a buff on a target when you holy shock them that heals them if you holy shock somebody else, and it also leaves debuff on an enemy as well, so it'll damage them if you holy shock someone else as well there. So essentially with this, you're just trying to holy shock as many people as possible and just get holy shocks out as often as possible and just keep that button on cooldown. For the class side of the tree, it's pretty standard. You'll take some stuff like the Divine Steed talents just because you need some points to get down into the second tier. And then you'll pretty much just take all of these throughput talents on the left here. Golden Path, this now Consecration heals you and 5 allies within it. This is a Soulbind. I think this is a Conduit in Shadowlands. I think that this just healed yourself in Shadowlands though, but now it heals you and 5 allies within it. It's not a bad talent, it's just some nice extra throughput for something that you should be throwing down pretty much all the time with your Consecration, because you should have that up pretty much 100% of the time, so just some good passive throughput there. Also taking Judgment of Light, which is pretty standard for raiding. Judgment causes the next 25 attacks against the target, so the raid boss, right, to heal the attacker people in your raid. Some other talents. This buffs Golden Path. Some of you may remember this as the Ashen Hallow Conduit. This used to be essentially the same effect. It would strike the lowest health ally or enemy within it an additional time, but this is specific to Ashen Hallow. But now that Golden Path heals not just you, they've given us this talent to buff Golden Path and sort of play into that conduit that we had for Ashen Hallow. And then further down the tree, you'll see some legendaries, some legendary stuff that we had in Shadowlands. For example, of Dusk and Dawn. When you reach 5 holy power, you gain Blessing of Dawn, which increases your damage and healing and increases your holy power spending abilities, Word of Glory, Light of Dawn, and then Blessing of Dusk, which reduces your damage taken, increases your armor, and your holy power generating abilities cooldown 10% faster. So holy power generating abilities, Crusader Strike, Hammer of Wrath, things like that there. Holy Shock is a holy power generating ability, so pretty good to kind of cycle back and forth from 5 holy power to 0 holy power as often as possible. And there's right underneath it, this just buffs that. It just when you have that Dawn buff, you holy power spending abilities do even more damage or healing, and in the Dusk, your holy power stuff cools down. That's reflected in this tooltip because I've taken this, so don't think this is bugged. They've just updated a lot of the tooltips. When you take stuff that buffs them, it updates the original tooltip as well. Some other stuff I've taken in this tree is Seraphim. This is pretty good in Raid, especially if you have, a big window of throughput that you're about to need, some big damage is going out. You Seraphim, pump out a Divine Toll or something like that. Really get some extra juice going for your throughput. Other than that, I wouldn't bother taking any of this stuff here on the right. This is pretty much all damage stuff, which is good, but for Raid, probably not the most needed. Holy Paladins already do a pretty good passive damage for healers, so you can pretty much ignore all of these. You're never going to take the Interrupt in Raid. This is new to Holy Paladins in Dragonflight, right? We have access to Rebuke, but again, you're never going to take this in Raids. There's at least 19 other people in the raid, in a mythic raid anyways, and if your if your 16 DPS plus tanks can't interrupt, that's on them, not on you. Don't take rebuke in raid. Other than that though, that's pretty much it for the class tree. For the holy tree, you obviously you're gonna take all this stuff in the beginning. Take bestow faith just so we can get out of this tree, and just so we can again skip down to this bottom tier. You'll take aura mastery, of course, and then there's a talent here that buffs aura mastery, which will increase all healing received by party or raid members by 10%. Pretty good in raid, right? Because generally if you're using aura mastery, there's big damage going on and your other healers are going to be pumping too, so this just gives them and yourself just a little bit more throughput while you have aura mastery going on, which is very helpful. There is a talent here that reduces the cooldown of aura mastery by 30 seconds. I don't think this is as good for raid as it is for dungeons, just because if you're not hitting aura mastery on that 2 minutes 30 reduced cooldown just on CD, then this talent is kind of worthless, right? The 30 seconds just isn't a huge cooldown buff. You'd rather have something like this that just buffs it, because when you need it, you're gonna need it, right? There's just not as much of a chance of you needing it 30 seconds earlier as just having it on the normal 3 minutes and just having a much bigger impact. So that's why this is here. You'll also want to take Rule of Law, very good in raid, helps you reach, especially as Holy Paladin, since we're so melee focused, this helps you reach folks that are standing in the boonies in raid. We all know those DPS boomkins. And then also take Light of the Martyr. This is a really good spawn heal in raid if your Holy Shock is down, if you don't have Holy Power, if you're on the move. This is good to just sort of get some spawn healing out. And then you can take the Untempering Dedication. This was a conduit in Shadowlands. This buffs Light of the Martyr by 10% each time it's cast, and this stacks up to 5 times and lasts for 15 seconds. So essentially, as long as you Light of the Martyr every 15 seconds, you'll have this buff all the way throughout the fight. So no real worries about upkeep or having to maintain this buff. As long as you just cast Light of the Martyr relatively often, you'll just have this rolling throughout the fight. You'll notice that I didn't take Maraud's. I don't think Maraud's is worth it in this build, just because there's some, that means you have to give up some other stuff. For example, you'd have to give up either this Light of Dawn, the range increase to 40 yards, which again in raid, that 40 yards is really a big deal, because you've got boomkins, mages, warlocks standing on the other side of the boss room, and you're trying to get out as much healing as possible. There, and then down here we've got Empyrean Legacy, which is the I think this was, I can't remember if this was the Shadowlands tier set or part of the Necrolord Covenant ability, but regardless, it's kind of a mix, because when you ever use Judgment every 30 seconds, your next Word of Glory will cast Light of Dawn with 25% increased effectiveness. So essentially, Judgment, and then your Word of Glory will just automatically cast Light of Dawn. So just a nice little throughput boost. This is pretty good talent. Right now it's bugged on the beta and it just does not work at all. So fingers crossed that this is fixed. I'd imagine this is going to be fixed before raid, at least. You know, we're still a month out from the raid being released. So fingers crossed there that this is fixed. I expect it to be fixed. And on the left side of the tree, we've got Divine Toll, and then Divine Resonance, which was the conduit buff in this is either the conduit or the legendary, but essentially this just casts Holy Shock every 5 seconds after you cast Divine Toll, and it goes 15 seconds, so you get 3 extra Holy Shocks after you cast Divine Toll for free. So this is pretty good, especially in this Glimmer build, because you're trying to get as much Holy Shocks out as possible. I will just caveat with Divine Toll, just remember that this doesn't cast on your mouse over target, it casts on the target that you currently have selected. So what I mean by that is if you have the boss selected, but you know, mouse over like a DPS frame or something in your raid and you cast Divine Toll, it's gonna cast on the boss. And so if there are more enemies, if there's, you know, if it's an ad fight or something like that, or if it's like a council fight, Divine Toll will prioritize enemies if you have an enemy selected. So that's who it's going to Holy Shock. If you have a friendly target selected, then it's going to prioritize friendly targets. So just be mindful of that when you're trying to Divine Toll. If you're trying to Divine Toll to top up your raid, you're going to want to make sure that you actually have a raid member selected instead of a boss or something like that, because otherwise you'll just Holy Shock a bunch of enemies and nobody will get healed. If that's what you're after, great, awesome, go for it. But if you're trying to heal the raid with Divine Toll, you're going to want to click on a raid member and then cast it. That also will put Glimmer on folks, which again just makes this is what this build is really for, right? Getting Holy Shocks out, getting those Glimmers out, and buffing those. And whenever you don't have Holy Shock or Holy Power, you're going to cast Light of the Martyr in between those and just kind of get some extra throughput, or if you're moving around, just Light of the Martyr in between them and get things moving. There is sort of some flexibility here with this build. You could skip the Divine Resonance. It's pretty good though, but you can skip it if this really isn't your jam, and you can take something like Blessing of Summer, which I've been having a lot of fun with. Some people don't really like this. I'll talk more about this one in the dungeon, in the dungeon talents, but this is an option. If you want, you can take Mirage instead of the Divine Resonance. That's definitely a possibility, right? So there is some flexibility with this talent tree. You can kind of mix and match up, but this is the main talent tree for the Glimmer raiding build. And so next we will talk about the dungeon talents. This is what I've been running on the beta in M+. On the left hand side on the class tree, you'll notice that we've dropped a lot of these throughput talents, and we've gone for more of damage talents instead. We've taken the talent that Judgment causes the target to take increased damage from our Crusader Strike or Holy Shock, so just some extra throughput. And we've also taken Rebuke, which is the first time Holy Paladins have had access to this. It's just the Paladin Interrupt. This is really good in dungeons. If you know you're just slamming through a dungeon and you see a cast going off, and you just throw your Rebuke out there, stop that cast from going off. If you think about this as, you can almost think about Rebuke as a tiny bit of throughput, because if you stop a cast that was about to damage somebody, you don't have to heal that damage anymore. So if you think about it in a roundabout way, Rebuke is kind of a healing CD. But it's just really good to have in dungeons, since there's so many casts going on and there's only 5 people in that group, and one of them might be a Shadow Priest, or one of them might be a Boomkin, God forbid, and you're stuck with a 40-60 second interrupt, and you want to have this extra interrupt in there for yourself as a Holy Paladin. So this is really good in dungeons. I found myself really making good use of this. And then further down we have some other talents. This is new. This Incandescence talent, each holy power you spend has a chance to cause your concentration to flare up, which just means it does damage to enemies standing in it, so just a buff to consecration. And then there's another talent underneath it that is just a flat buff to consecration's damage, which is pretty good, because like I mentioned earlier, you pretty much always want to have consecration down, because it's just an easy button to have down. It's where a lot of our sort of passive damage comes from, especially in dungeons. Just plop concentration down, let it do its thing. And then further down, we've got Zealot's Paragon. This is called Legacy of the Mad Paragon in Shadowlands. Basically Hammer of Wrath. In Shadowlands, it used to be Hammer of Wrath extended the duration of Avenging Crusader. Now it's Hammer of Wrath and Judgment. And this is Avenging Crusader because I have Avenging Crusader talented in the Holy Tree, but it is Avenging Wrath. So it'll work the same regardless of what you have. But Hammer of Wrath and Judgment deal more damage, which is a good thing, right? And they extend the duration of Avenging Crusader. So essentially, when you have wings up, you just want to be tossing Judgment and Hammer of Wrath on CD to keep your wings going as long as possible. And then on the left hand side, we've kept the of Dusk and Dawn. I think this is really good for Paladins. I've played a lot with this, and I think it's relatively easy to maintain, right? You just get your holy power to full, send it to 0, rinse and repeat, right? And you can't always do that, right? Just given situations, you definitely always want to prioritize healing your group. So sometimes you can't always do the 5 and 0, but most of the time you can. It's not that big of a deal. And then into the Holy Tree, we've taken mostly things that will buff either Holy Shock or our damage. So we've still taken Bestow Faith. You'll see me take this in pretty much every talent tree, just because there's not a lot of good stuff in this first area for Paladins, and so just kind of taking this has been just to get down to the second tier. It's not been bad in dungeons for my experience. That holy power is kind of nice, and just some small extra throughput. You just kind of throw it on somebody when you're thinking about it, and you'll get some free holy power and heal them for a little bit there. You'll notice that I've taken the talent that reduces the cooldown of Warrior Mastery. Like I mentioned in the raid towns, this is not very good in raid, but I think in dungeons it's better because it gives you more of an opportunity to have Warrior Mastery up when you need it. In raids, you're going to know exactly when you want to Warrior Mastery, right? You probably have your CDs talked out with your raid, and so this isn't as good. But in dungeons, sometimes, some things can go off the rails a little quickly, a little quicker than in raid. So just having access to Aura Mastery more frequently, I think is more worth it than the 10% healing. Just because in dungeons, you're the only one that's healing. So the extra 10%, I don't think makes a huge difference. And so further to the right, I took this talent just because I didn't want to take the Tower of Radiance talent or Light of the Martyr in dungeons, and I still wanted to get down to the Holy Shock, the 15% increased crit on Holy Shock, because that's really good in dungeons, just really good in general. Honestly, for Holy Paladin, Holy Shock is one of our main spells. It's one of our main DPS spells. It's one of our main healing spells. It's just a really priority spell for us, right? So this talent is really good here. So I just wanted to kind of cruise down here. I probably will never cast Infusion of Light in dungeons, but you gotta take this talent to kind of get down there. Echoing Blessings, this was Finesse Conduit from Shadowlands. So this is back for Dragonflight here, so I've taken that to get down here. And then on the left side, just things like Light's Hammer, which we take generally right now in Shadowlands. Just a nice AoE every minute, pretty much up for most pulls. Just slam that down and go to town. And then I've also taken Beacon of Faith. I think Beacon of Virtue is fine, but the problem is right now in the beta it's not working. You'll hear me say that a lot with Paladin. Shout out to Blizzard. But right now Beacon of Virtue isn't working, so I'm taking Beacon of Faith. I think in dungeons, Beacon of Faith is fine. Put the beacon on you, put the beacon on the tank, and then just spend most of your GCDs, your healing GCDs, healing the DPS that are standing in fire, and then that'll just sort of, keep you topped, keep the tank topped. Most tanks can take care of themselves in dungeons, right? So this just gives them just a little bit of extra throughput there. And then of course I've taken Divine Toll. I have not taken Divine Resonance because I don't think this is particularly good in dungeons. I just don't think it's that great compared to some alternatives, right? Because you definitely want to take Crusader's Might to kind of so that Crusader Strike reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock by 2 seconds. This is really good in dungeons, especially, right? If you can always be in that pack hitting something, you're pretty much always get Holy Shock when you need it, right? Glimmer is good just because it's just that sort of passive. If throughput is nice. Also, here you'll notice I've taken Blessing of Summer. This is the Night Fae ability for Paladins in Shadowlands. Pretty much nobody played Night Fae Paladin in Shadowlands. I think maybe some people played it in PvP, but I'm not a PvPer, so no idea. Definitely in PvE, this ability saw 0 use. But now that it's a talent here in Dragonflight, some people have been picking it up. I like it. I think it's kind of fun. I like the idea though of being sort of, of of the healer being sort of a support class, right? Like if you think like in something like League or like Overwatch, you have these like abilities that buff your teammates. And so in WoW, there's really not a lot of that. There's PI, which is a hotly contested spell, right? There's lots of sort of discussion and angst about that ability. Blessing of Summer is nowhere near as maybe front-loaded as PI, but I think it's still really good, and it's kind of fun to just throw that out and give your team buffs. You can give the top DPS the buff is generally what I do. So Blessing of Summer, so it'll turn through it'll turn through the seasons, right? So it'll start with Blessing of Summer, and then which, as you see here, it will bless an ally for 30 seconds. So it's a 30-second, all these buffs are 30 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. So Blessing of Summer causes an ally to have their attacks to have a 40% chance to deal 30% additional damage as holy. Lots of percents there, but TLDR, it gives them more damage. Blessing of Autumn, which is what it turns to after Summer, will give them CDR. So it'll just kind of speed up their CDR. So if you played Priest in Shadowlands, the Night Fae ability, the Guardian Spirits, that reduced the target's cooldown. Blessing of Autumn pretty much does the same thing. Blessing of Winter, which comes after that, gives them a chance for their abilities to do, their attacks to do a little bit of extra damage and slow, which is kind of niche. That's probably mostly useful in PvP, but it's just some extra damage, so you just kind of want to throw that out on CD on a DPS, right? And then Blessing of Spring is a buff that it increases healing done and healing received. So I almost always slam Blessing of Spring on myself, and the other three ones, Summer, Autumn, and Winter, on the DPS. Either whichever DPS is doing the most damage, which is normally what I do, or whichever DPS is from my guild, and I'm trying to juice them up. So that's Blessing of Summer. I think it's a lot of fun. Some people have not been running it just because it's not super noticeable, and it's not as impactful as PI, so it's kind of hard to notice up front, but it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a good button. It's a great ability. It feels good to play. So I've been running it, and I've been having a lot of fun, and I think a lot of success with it. I've also taken, in this build, this is the last thing I'll talk about on the dungeon one before I move on. I've taken Avenging Crusader here. An Avenging Crusader basically updates Avenging Wrath. So when you use it, Crusader Strike and Judgment cooldown 30% faster and heal up to 300 allies for 250% of the damage they deal. In dungeons, this is so good. If there's a big damage period going on, you just pop Avenging Crusader and you just crank out Crusader Strikes and Judgments, and your group is topped in no time. It is crazy strong. It feels great to play, honestly. You have big damage, you pop Avenging Crusader, you go beat up some mobs, and suddenly your party's full health. It's great. It's awesome. So would definitely recommend running Avenging Crusader over the crit chance that Avenging Wrath might gives, the extra 20% crit. I think in dungeons, Avenging Crusader is way better. That's it for the dungeon section, though, and on to sort of the new old the new old build for Paladin, some caster Paladin stuff. This is kind of weird. Theoretically, right? This build has the highest potential for holy power generation. The only downside is that you kind of have to plant a lot and cast Flash of Light and Holy Light and that pretty much after every Holy Shock, right? Because Holy Shock will give you Infusion of Light, and you're gonna want to cast every single Infusion of Light proc to get to make use of that if you're really playing the Castodin. The problem is making use of every single Infusion of Light means standing there and hard casting Flash of Light or Holy Light. In raid, that can kind of be hard sometimes. You've got lots of Groan Denial, you've got stuff you've got to dodge, maybe there's frontals from the boss, and so caster is kind of immobile, and so it's That's the drawback to Caster Paladin. But theoretically, like I mentioned, this does theoretically have the highest holy power generation. It's just you gotta kind of plant to make it work. So on the left side for class tree, this is pretty much like I had for raid before. You'll see I take a lot of the throughput talents over here. Still take Seraphim. So this is pretty much exactly the same as it was before. For the holy tree though, you'll see that we've taken some new stuff here. So for example, we've gone to the left and we've taken the Resplendent Lights. Holy Light heals up to 5 targets for 8% of its healing. Not a great spell, but not a bad one either, especially if you're going to be casting Holy Light so much. And then beneath it, there's Divine Favor, which is a new button, and essentially it makes your Holy Light or Flash of Light cast faster and heal more. So it's a 45-second CD, so good to use if you're like, oh shit, I gotta heal this person. You can Divine Favor, toss them a huge Holy Light, and they'll be full. Or even honestly, with this, a Flash of Light would really do a lot of healing too. So Divine Favor is really good. And also down here, there's this well-empowered Divine Revelation, so well-empowered by Infusion of Light, which is, like I mentioned, what you get after casting Holy Shock. It makes your Flash of Light or Holy Light cast faster, and powered with it, Flash of Light heals for an additional 10%. Holy Light refunds 1% of your maximum mana, which is really good for raid, because I feel like right now in raid testing in Dragonflight, a lot of healers are running really fast, which kind of makes sense though for early prog, right? I think in prog, in raid progression, that is, a lot of healers sort of juice mana really early, and sort of as you get more into the tier, you kind of have a better understanding of the fights, and you learn to kind of manage your mana a little bit better. So that kind of tracks. But that 1% mana refund is kind of nice to help in the meantime. But the big talents are on the right here for Caster Paladin. Things like Tears Deliverance, which is a new one for I think this was in Legion. I didn't play in Legion, so I can't say. But basically, this just heals a bunch of people around you. It heals 500 allies instantly, and then every second it heals another injured ally. These allies healed also they have a buff on them, which will give them 25% increased healing from Holy Light and Flash of Light. There's a talent beneath this that buffs Tears Deliverance, where every time you cast Flash of Light or Holy Light on a target that has that buff I mentioned from Tears Deliverance, will extend the duration of Tears Deliverance by 2.5 seconds for Flash of Light and 5 seconds for Holy Light, overall to a maximum of 50 seconds. So you can make this Tears Deliverance go from a 10-second buff to a minute-long buff. So theoretically, you could have 66% uptime on this ability, which is really good for Caster Paladin, right? This really helps with that throughput. Really helps with just buffing that Holy Light and Flash of Light, because generally those spells don't do a ton of healing for Paladin. It's mostly Holy Shock, Word of Glory, Light of Dawn, right? And you're still going to want to use Holy Shock, Word of Glory, Light of Dawn, right? Because you're still going to be building Holy Power, and the only things that you have to spend it on are Word of Glory and Light of Dawn, in a raid anyways, right? In dungeons you can cast Shield of the Righteous if you want, but in raid you should really always be spending that Holy Power on Word of Glory or Light of Dawn. And so Tears Deliverance just juices those casting spells for you. And then down here I've also taken Inflorescence of the Sunwell, which means Infusion of Light has 1 additional charge, reduces the cost of Flash of Light by an additional 30%, so it makes your Flash of Light really cheap, and your Holy Light has a 30% chance to generate 1 more Holy Power. So this is kind of what I mean about this build being theoretically the best Holy Power generation. Is you get your Infusion of Light, you cast Holy Power with Tower of Radiance, you cast Holy Light on the tank, it gives you 1 Holy Power from Infusion of Light, 1 Holy Power from Tower of Radiance, and with Influence of the Sunwell you have 30% chance to get another Holy Power, so you could theoretically get 3 Holy Power just from casting a Holy Light on the tank, which is a lot of throughput, right? A lot of Holy Power, a lot of healing kind of comes from that, and so that's really the strength of this build, is really building up holy power and spending it in big lighted dawns, and then just sort of filling that time in between holy shock and light of dawn with holy light and flash of light cast. And so that's what this caster build in Dragonflight looks like. Like I mentioned, theoretically this has the highest throughput, at least holy power generation, maybe not the highest throughput, but those two are kind of linked. But like I mentioned, the problem is you have to stand still for a lot of this build, which in raid can lead to you dying, because you are a very slow class in Holy Paladin. You do have 2 divines. It's really easy now to get 2 divine steed charges and increase the duration of divine steed by 1 second. So you're not too immobile, but at the same time, you are still gonna have to stand still and cast Holy Light and Flash of Light a lot, and that kind of sucks, honestly. But if that sounds fun to you, if you really enjoy Caster Paladin, I think it's really good. You just have to plant a lot, and if that's not a problem for you, go for it. Play Caster Paladin. Just remember though that even though this is Caster Paladin, that you still got to be in melee. You know what I mean? You're still going to want to be in melee to get Crusader Strike to generate holy power, get your judgment stuff. I guess judgment is ranged, but you're still going to want to be in melee, right? To drop your concentrations, to cast your Crusader Strikes. You're just going to be casting Holy Light and Flash of Light more often. But that's the caster build. So those are the 3 kind of builds right now. The dungeon build I mentioned, the standard raid glimmer build, and then this caster build. Let me know if you guys have any questions or thoughts on any of these builds or Holy Paladin in general. Like I mentioned, over the next couple days, I'll be posting a few videos with some new dungeons from Dragonflight from a Holy Paladin perspective, so wanted to share these talents ahead of time. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts. Make sure to like and subscribe as well. See you guys later.